Hi, I'm Don the Pleb. Peter and I are going to be off for this week, and so I'm recording a bunch of these little videos so that we keep a nice, good stream of content for you guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy these videos, by all means, stick around, subscribe. We normally talk about the news. With that said, in the last video we talked about public works and why it was the Fabians decided they wanted these things as the method of entryism into socialism. And a quick and dirty, if you haven't watched it, though you should go back and watch it, is that if you can convince people that seizing the means of production in one avenue is good, then it must be good in some other avenue. And you see this as the slippery slope everywhere, all over the Western world. With that said, the idea of permeation was their method for getting this done. Now, permeation, in general colloquial sense, is probably not particularly useful, but it is the idea that things will just kind of go on their own, right? Heat will permeate a room, and this was their idea, right? It wasn't so much that they needed to convince you, the member of the proletariat, that these things were a good idea. They needed to convince the political class. And the method that they used was not so much going up and arguing, because they were very much aware that no one was interested in an argument for socialism, at least not open and outright. However, if you could get a number of, in the British world, MPs or whatever they are, congressmen in the United States, I'm sure, to openly talk about whether or not the government should provide a service, eventually it becomes an acceptable idea. Once it becomes an acceptable idea, there immediately starts questions of how to get it done. And once there are questions of how to get it done, then there's a goal. There's a goal that politicians can claim credit for. They can say that they did something for you. And once that happens, you don't even need the socialists to be the one to propose it. Which is why, I forget the name of the prime minister, but he was a conservative prime minister. Links will be in the description for their own reasoning behind this. But a conservative prime minister in the UK proposed public education. And the Fabians' argument was what they had done by that point was made the idea of public education a generally good enough idea. That someone was going to propose it, and then they didn't have to. Because the conservative, while he was openly near begging for a Fabian socialist principle that would be entryism into socialism, he would never have that claim laid against him, for he was conservative. Therefore, it was not socialist. And so the socialist idea never had to be defended as socialist. It was just accepted. Now, whether or not the proletariat accepted it was effectively irrelevant. As long as the government could decree they had to do it, then they had to do it. And given enough time, the proletariat would find this acceptable, and eventually it would become sort of its own tradition, and the proletariat would then defend it and demand that it be better. And during that time, the socialists could argue through school, while the people were young and not very intelligent, per se, that socialism was a good idea, that the proletariat really did have these problems, and that they really did need to rise up in some fashion and have the government take care of more things, because, again, the Fabians were not interested in the revolution. They didn't think it was going to happen, and they'd watched it fail numerous times, but they were pretty sure that you could have a slow drip, an idea permeate through the culture after you had won in politics, and then the politics could move on. And you see this over and over and over again in political history. The requirement is to get the authority to say that a thing is good. And so prime examples, and as I am an American, I am much more familiar with American politics, but the UK examples that I am aware of are the NHS. It was not terribly popular at the time that it happened. The Labour Party / socialist government that was backing Churchill at the time said, you're going to do it, and I don't care if you like it. And so he did, and now it is a religion. It must be protected. It must be, it's the problem isn't that it's a terrible system, it's that it's not efficient enough. always a problem of socialism, but for some reason this time we still can't call it socialism, regardless of whether or not the means of production were seized. And they were. In the United States, you find similar things with Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court hearing, in which, while the country was coming around to the idea of abortion being acceptable, it only took the Supreme Court saying that it was a constitutional right, and here we are approximately 60 years later, and now we're down from it's a constitutional right that's terrible to, well, abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, down to shout your abortion. You can equally see this with the National Firearms Act of 1934, in which we banned automatic weapons, which wasn't terribly popular even at the time. There was a lawsuit kicked off almost immediately after it happened. You can see the same thing again with the Affordable Care Act, which was the most unpopular bill ever passed in American history. And now you have large swaths of the population talking about how it didn't go far enough and how great of a thing it is and how they would be dead if it wasn't for the Affordable Care Act, which it doesn't matter that that is an abject lie. It must continue because it has been here. The culture was forcibly changed by the passage of these laws. There are thousands upon thousands of examples of this. However, all of these are well enough known that if I say them, you all know what I'm talking about. It's the only reason they're being used as examples. Now, there is, I have had it brought to me a couple of times, I guess I should say, that, well, the idea of permeation does include the idea of changing the culture. Yes, it does. However, the method that they used for permeation was to change the levers of power. They weren't very interested in how long it would take or how big of a deal it would be if the proletariat were upset by any of these changes. There's another reason they didn't want to propose them themselves. If they proposed the NHS and it went badly and the proletariat was upset, well, then they might suffer the consequences. But if they got it in under a conservative name like Churchill, well then, if it goes badly, it's Churchill's problem and Churchill's fault, and so socialism no longer has to take the fall for it. I mean, it's honestly brilliant. I hate these people with every fiber of my being, but it is brilliant, and it is successful. It is so successful that most people seem to not even be willing to examine the idea that it either is happening or has happened, and yet it is easily trackable. It is documented in advance, and then the same people who said they were going to do it did it, and then when they did it, everyone said that didn't happen. This was the essence of the idea of permeation, that they could get socialist policies, call them something other than socialist, and that people would accept them and then defend them as though they were not socialism. And that is exactly what happened. Thank you for watching.